Thank you everyone for attending our first artist talk for Women's Soaring Project's art show titled Women Antiracists in celebration of Women's History Month. I'm Jackie Lowe, an art instructor at Miracosta College and Southwestern College. I also co-founded Women's Soaring Project with Dr. Jane Scaife, a sociology professor at Sierra College and UC Davis, who is here moderating the chat today. We are best friends and educators who created WSP as a resource to learn and be inspired by the incredible women in history. I would also like to introduce our other co-host, WSP board advisor, a fellow artist and art professor, Jen Lugris.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm an artist based out of Sacramento, California. My paintings honor the sacrifices of my ancestors who were refugees who escaped North Korea and Uruguayan and Argentinian dictatorships. I paint scenes from my everyday mundane life as a loving wife and tired mom of two, as bright, vibrant scenarios to show gratitude and not take these moments for granted. My work has been shown internationally, and most recently, I was commissioned by formerly Facebook, now called Meta, to make a large multi-panel painting and mural installation on the 30th floor of their San Francisco office location. Finally, I teach at Sierra College. Each year, we have a theme under which we highlight the achievements of historical women, and this year was Women Anti-Racism. We invited artists from all around the world to submit artwork recognizing women who fought against systemic racism and effected positive change. We were amazed by the insightfulness and creativity of all the work, but 3 artworks stood out, and we have the artists today to speak about those works. These artists are LegakwanaLeo Makgekgenene, Nanette Newbry, and ILDIKO Nova. At the end of all 3 talks, we will take questions from the audience, so you can enter them in the chat box.
Our first artist is LegakwanaLeo Makgekgenene, an artist from Botswana. They hold a Master of Fine Art in New Media from University of Cape Town. LegakwanaLeo's work is a determined effort to bypass cultural censorship and to counteract the restrictions of toxic traditionalism, producing an elusive critique of state machinery and sociological constructions. Makgekgenene's work engages with the evolution of Botswana's women's movements while exploring specifically for Black women alternative points of access to critical and radical pedagogies. Makgekgenene is a co-founder of the Botswana Pavilion, which aims to encourage creative and alternative creative engagement of subjective realities amongst art practitioners in contemporary Botswana. So Leo, if you would like to talk about your work. Oops. Sorry, I was going to show that. Oh, you have to unmute yourself, sorry.
Sorry about that. So this piece comes from my master's body of work. It's part of a triptych. I'm just going to share my screen now to walk you through the concept briefly. Is it sharing? I can't tell.
I don't see it yet. Do you see a share screen on the bottom?
Yeah. I'll talk in the meanwhile. So for this, I really sought out to bring to light and just like regular discourse the women that helped propel Botswana's independence, a lot of law reform, land rights issues, birth and nationality issues that became like issues that were now in the people's hands after independence. So instead, I found that our national narrative, or the narrative that makes Botswana Botswana and known as it is in the region, um, is by is in actuality very fictional, in part of, like, in its most like integral parts, and also just looking at how the narrative is so male centered, and none of the women who contributed were, you know, given space in Botswana's history, or the way that the nation's identity was formed and is like now understood and celebrated, like during independence, etc. So Botswana was a British protectorate, and we now are starting to understand it more as, like, because like it gave the nation the feeling that they weren't colonized like other African countries. They felt more that they had sent their cultural leaders, our chiefs, three from the major tribes, to go and plead with the British for protection. And then later in our like origin story, they're said to have been the ones who went again to ask for independence. So Botswana doesn't have a strong liberation story like other African nations. It's rather like a story of how submissiveness or subservience like allowed our independence to be. And it's something that is just known and felt in the general spirit of the country. So as the project grew, eventually what it aimed to do was kind of take the blank spots in our history that should have been filled with images and archives of the women who. Sorry, I'm still trying to get this recording to come up.
Do you want me to, is there something I can screen share on my side if you want me to, is it
Yes,
online or?
I'm just gonna copy the link into the chat.
Oh, okay, perfect. And I can do that.
Thanks, sorry about that. So that's just the link to the virtual exhibition. Once you're in, then I'll try and navigate you to the area this work is from. So the portraits is 3 works side by side, and they come from the story that the 3 chiefs went to go and ask for Botswana's independence. So we can just navigate in and then to the right, or just keep flipping through guide points. I think it'll come up eventually.
Sorry, to the right you said, or?
Just where it says next guide point, you can keep on clicking, and I'll let you know when you can stop.
I'm sorry, I don't see the next guide point here.
You see where the play button is in the middle at the bottom?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that one.
Should I hit next?
Yes, just click it a couple of times.
Okay.
So an important part of the first visit to England that led to independence was that part of what the chiefs brought back as proof that they had gone to England and that they had, friendly discussion or negotiation, that the trip went well, was 3 gifts that they brought back with them. So apparently the Queen had gifted them shawls for their wives, Setswana to English Bibles, and a portrait of herself, which kind of just started how Botswana viewed portraiture. So that portrait was held as, how can I say, like a treasured item, and still is. And the shawls that they were given have now found their way into like Botswana's cultural attire, which is what you see the figure wearing in the image. And yeah, since then, with every presidency, our leaders get photographed in a certain way. And usually, or before 2016, the government used to hand out these portraits for free, and people would put them up in their homes and their businesses. Um, I think while you're there, you can actually click the name of the piece. Yeah, a little bit lower. It's down by M, the last one. Mukapel, yeah. See that my time is almost up. Yeah, so this kind of refers to that story, how these 3 chiefs were then made like the poster boys of Botswana's freedom, not liberation as such. How just images of women were missing at that time. Women in politics were erased. Women's input and contributions were not represented, and this work just tries to remind us in like a parallel, alternate sort of history present that of these figures. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see. Let me stop share.
Thank you. So next we have Nanette Newbry. Nanette Newbry is a contemporary painter and printmaker who works primarily in encaustic. She completed her BA in visual and theater arts at the University of California, San Diego, after spending 10 years as a model and actor. She spent 30 years as a graphic designer and brings those skills into her work. Her studio is in Carlsbad, California, where her practice tells stories based on memory, psychological, philosophical, and spiritual concepts. She teaches encaustic to intimate groups as well as online. Her work is in the permanent collections at the Museum of Encaustic Art, the Encaustic Art Institute, and in corporate and private collections in the US and abroad.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. And I wanted to thank the Women's Soaring Project for selecting my work. I'm very, very honored and humbled by this, and to see women from around the world like me who are so passionate about feminism and the woman's place in the world today. I'll share my screen a moment so that I can talk about who can share. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. So this is 24 by 24 inches, and it is in encaustic. It's all encaustic. And it's really not so much about the work, even though that's what's selected, but about the woman who it's about. And Yuri Kochiyama is her name, and she was a Japanese American woman who grew up in the Bay Area. And when she was 18 years old, she was interned into basically prison camps during World War II. She and her family, her whole family, she had a twin brother and her mother. And her father was one of the things, pivotal points in her life was her father was recovering from surgery in the hospital. And soldiers came in and actually arrested him in the hospital while he was there recovering from the surgery. And they put a big sign up on his sheet that, the section that covers the hospital bed that said prisoner of war. And soon afterwards, he passed, he died. And this had a profound effect on Yuri. And so she was in the prison camp for a number of years. And she met her husband there, Bill, and both she and Bill became activists throughout their whole lives. And as a kid, I spent years in Japan, so both my husband and I are really drawn to Japanese culture, Japanese art, and so Yuri's name came up in in the call for art, and I immediately was attracted to her life. So on the right hand side panel, printed is the whole act that was actually passed in 1988, primarily because she and William, her husband, testified before Congress to get restitution for not only the Japanese Americans, but for the indigenous Alaskan Indians who were misplaced or displaced, to make a military base up in Alaska, and they just completely devastated like 7 tribes up there. And so on the right-hand side, I've done a piece like this before where I did the Patriot Act, when the Patriot Act was passed. So this is mounted, and then on top of it is the Sea of Japan. Waves and rocks from the Sea of Japan that kind of symbolize kind of the sinking of human rights that happened during that time. And then on the left-hand side panel is a plum tree, again with an ocean, and the plum tree is dying. So again, that you can just infer whatever you want to with that. So one of the things I wanted to mention is that she has a memoir that she wrote, and I'll pass that on to the group so that you can read more about her life. But one of the other things I wanted to mention is that kind of how art continues to live on, and the concepts of how art continues to live on, is that she was very involved in nuclear proliferation, which I think is very timely for today, and how important it is for us, not only as citizens, but as women, to speak about these things and to stand up for the rights of all people. She was also very close to Malcolm X, and was there actually when he was shot, when he was murdered. And so a lot of her legacy is around that. There was an image that was taken of her that was in Life magazine, but she did so much more in her life. And she died, trying to remember when she died, I think 84 is when she passed. And even President Obama honored her. So I don't know, I just was really moved by her You know, she spent her whole life doing this, and she had 6 children besides. And I like, how in the hell did she do that? I don't know. But she was so driven that, you know, people like that just amaze me, that they have so much energy and so much, they're just so driven by what they believe in. And I think we can learn a lot from that. So that's really all I have to say.
Great, thank you. So we'll move on to our next artist, ILDIKO Nova. Let me go onto this screen. And I'm going to circle back later to Leo's page because I shortened that a little a bit earlier. So, but for ILDIKO Nova, she's our third and but not least artist for today. She's born in Hungary of Roma ethnicity, where she lived as a refugee for 4 years before immigrating to Canada. Now based in Winnipeg, Manitoba, ILDIKO is a self-taught artist who uses a variety of media to explore the line between reality and dreaming. She's a graduate of the Community Worker Program of George Brown College, which is based in working with communities from a far rights-based and empowerment approach, which is towards lasting social change. Today, she volunteers at various art organizations, teaching art classes and workshops. With her own personal experience as a Roma in Eastern Europe, ILDIKO is an activist for human rights issues, particularly the underprivileged, marginalized communities, ethnic groups, animal welfare, and an overall emphasis on protecting the most vulnerable in our society. Welcome, ILDIKO. Oh, you gotta unmute. Oh, you gotta hit the unmute button.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for including me in this great honor of sharing art and encourage other women in the world. So welcome from Territory 1, the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So this is a source of University of Manitoba, so I'm sure it's elder approved. So I spent my childhood in a Soviet occupation in Hungary. I was also adopted by white non-Roma parents. I felt a great deal of disillusionment from early on. All levels of communications, like family, school, state, were all liars, and it bothered me. Even though my parents avoided to discuss my ethnicity, I felt the tension. Teachers rewarded the white kids for less results. I just felt that everybody treated me as different, and I didn't understand why. There was a strong gap between them and me. So I left Hungary, and I ended up 4 years in Germany, and then I came to Toronto in 1992. And unfortunately, the workplaces showed me another type of racism, I guess. So all the procedures and practices affect people in ways such as exclusion, marginalization, and infantilization. So all these problematic behaviors at workplaces are explained as policies, and I can't accept that because policies are all man-made. So this attitude keeps BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, people or immigrants in lower social class in Canada. No matter how hard I worked there was no way to gain like promotion or to be able to move up on a social ladder. So also, Canadian society is full of stereotypes, which are simplified, distorted, and ignorant statements. Social media is also responsible for spreading these harmful generalizations and often used by the least educated mass. One of my intentions is to use art as a bridge to fight stereotypes. Art is creative and creates a more peaceful and interesting way to discussions. It can reach surprisingly wide audience. Hopefully, a cathartic experience can open up to more positive responses. Female support system is also very important in art and in general because the idea of matriarchal leadership would make significant positive impact in the world, in my opinion. Women as life givers express a greater responsibility in environmental and social issues. Minorities also needs to find common grounds with each other in order to be louder for human rights together. So in my particular piece for this contest, I made those two girls. They are carrying a stack of books. One is Maya Angelou on the cover. So one of her saying is, "I am a student of unity." So as my involvement in different communities, I always find ways that we can find more connections and universal values than the other way around. So we have to focus on what unites us, not to separate us. And also, so Josephine Baker in the other illustrated character in the picture. So she reestablished her life in France. She left United States and rebuilt an entire performance career in France, and also became like a human rights activist and support the war efforts, and her character resonates me because I feel that I restarted in many different communities, start all over, and wherever you are, you just give to the community and with your presence to do your share of fighting human rights or bring awareness and especially with this piece, I wanted to emphasize on like make it really, really positive. So it's like you look at these girls and I hope it resonates, that like it brings smile to your face, because to me it's like an ideal picture of what girls need. I grew up with very little encouragement to get education, and because it was like oppression on many levels. So even the women's role in society was oppression based. So it's like you do what your husband tells you and such things, and I became pretty loud to oppose that. So and the flower motifs on my image are like embroidery inspired. My grandma and I did a lot of embroidery when I grew up, and I just wanted to honor her through including those flowers to the image. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ildiko. I love
Thank
that you
you.
pointed out the decorative kind of elements here and the background of that and connecting it. There's definitely that light and kind of joy that comes from this image in the piece. So now we're going to ask some questions. It'll be general questions, maybe here and there. We can just have a conversation. And then for the audience, if anyone has questions, you can enter that into the Q&A. Jane will be moderating that as well, and we can pick out a few of those a bit towards the end. So questions. So I guess this can be anyone who wants to answer with regards to your work and activism in work. Do you think that art can dismantle systemic racism, and how so? Can it change public perception, reform policy, etc.? How do you see that in your work and where that comes into play? Nanette, yes.
One of the things that I didn't know about Yuri, and you talk about how art can change, and when she and Bill presented to the Congress, she actually brought her artwork, and I've been trying to find it, to the Congress to convince them that they needed to not only do an apology to the Japanese Americans and to the indigenous Alaskan tribes, but to pay money. And they paid like 1.5 billion dollars to these people in restitution. So that was one of the cornerstones of them getting the public to start being aware of what was going on, because of the visuals that were put out there, not just because people don't listen, right? People don't read, but they look. And so I feel like art plays a huge role in filling our spirit with facts and really what is the truth, or revealing what the truth is.
Oh yeah, Ildiko.
Yeah, so I strongly agree with Nanette when I started to smile when she said that people don't read. Yeah, like I when I was in college to study human rights and I became a community worker, we had to write papers. So I just realized that reading takes effort, it takes time, and now everything is so fast paced. So that's why I agree that a visual image can speak for itself the fastest. Yes, I agree. And also so the Roma community, that's what I'm most familiar with. So we seem to have like a worldwide movement right now. So there are a lot of art projects, and they are organizing for various issues, like some communities are so excluded, kids cannot go to school, some don't gain citizenships from the land they live on, and so like every community has their own struggles. And now I'm part of a project. We gotta make a animation short film. They're gonna be a permanent memorial for the Roma people in Berlin, and I'm really proud to be part of that project. And so the Roma people were like victim of the Holocaust, yet it's like they never got like a formal apology or compensation or anything for what happened to them. I don't like 600,000 people, or I can look it up. It's like the whole Holocaust is like obviously unacceptable, and so without these people who are like look back to family histories, until now nobody spoke up about these, and now it's getting recognition. So yes, art is very important, and it has a strong role to bring awareness and social change. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important what you said. It's shorthand, right? Like a shorthand kind of language or way of communicating things really immediately and just on visual sight, and people kind of respond viscerally, to the images they see, and maybe that will lead them to be curious, to learn more or find
Yes.
out,
Yes.
kind of
Yeah.
more
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
information there.
Um,
Oh.
Thank you all for your talks. It's been a pleasure to listen to them. I had a question. How do you overcome difficulties in your art making process? And do you have particular methods that help you? Everyone's smiling, but nobody wants to say anything. It's
I
never
can
The
answer.
hardest question.
Yeah, so I personally switch between mediums. So I do digital art, but I also do beaded embroidery, a little bit of carving, a little bit of acrylic paint, so traditional ink on paper. So sometimes I make postcards to my best friend and I mail it to her. So um, because I think when you look at the same thing for an extended time, like you just frustrate yourself, and it's just like a wheel in a muddy route. So look away and do something else and come back to the project usually helps me.
I just listened to a podcast this morning. I'm going to give a plug to Art Juice. Art Juice. It's two women. They're both painters, and they were just talking about when you have the blahs. And because I've had the blahs the last couple of weeks, so I need to limit my news. But they had a lot of really great suggestions about that. Changing mediums which was just mentioned. Changing mediums. I have different escape patches that I have. Some are good and some are not so good. So really finding the ones that work to help me get going again. One thing I think is really important to know, whether you're, a visual artist or filmmaker or writer or whatever, is that it won't last. It does pass. The blahs do pass, and it doesn't mean that I'm not a good artist or I'm not an artist if I, watch Netflix one afternoon till I turn my head off, but that eventually I will get back to the studio, and I also read a lot, and in reading different novels or different articles, it does spur my imagination to kind of like the here and now, what's going on today, without consuming myself with things that I cannot control.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know some artists who they actually work on multiple artworks at the same time, and then they will just stop, move into the next, and kind of, when they get tired of one, kind of shift back and forth between them. And similar to maybe working, but different mediums actually is really interesting too, because it's a complete switch in how you're working. And it's sometimes if it's just sort of idle work, your brain is just kind of left to kind of drift creatively, and spark some new ideas that way. Definitely. Leo, do you have any tips for us?
Come on, Leo.
Sorry. I got it down through science, but I try and look at the breaks as like very individual, or it's like very unique. So feel myself like coming off like maybe a couple of weeks straight of pure inspiration and like high discipline, and suddenly like slowing down a bit to just like try and take time, usually best in the morning and the evening, to try and figure out what exactly this break is supposed to be filled with. If it's reading, to think of different landscapes or whatever. Maybe it's like to travel, to actually get outside, or it's to go spend time with family and ask like difficult questions, 2, 3 a day, and just like make it my mission for this month, just to like have difficult conversations and like come back when I'm feeling re-energized and like unpack that. So I think like naming, and if I can't necessarily see a purpose for a break, then like giving it a purpose and like doing that relentlessly. If it can't work, then like I'll put my energy into whatever I've assigned for myself.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, Jen, do you have a question?
Oh no, I was gonna say the next question, or should I read? Okay. So because it's Women's History Month, we were wondering, are there any women artists that have influenced or inspired you, and in what ways?
One of my very famous artists is Joan Mitchell. She was, I guess, an abstract expressionist. I just saw the show in San Francisco a couple months ago, and she left New York and went to France, similar to I can't think of the name of the woman who was the dancer, Josephine Baker.
Josephine Baker.
Kind of like Josephine Baker. She left, New York, U.S. behind, moved to France, and that's where she made the majority of her work, which was another thing during those days. It's like if a woman didn't marry, it was kind of a black mark on her life, that something was not going to work out for her, which she just completely disregarded that. And anyway, so yeah, Joan Mitchell is one of my favorite. Actually, Faith Ringgold as well. Jackie, you mentioned her. And I guess there's a retrospective of her work right now in New York, in Brooklyn. And
oh, really?
She's African American, amazing storyteller with her quilts that she did, and a lot of which is kind of associated with women's work, but just far beyond. The concepts are far beyond anything that you can imagine. And anyway, Faith Ringgold, she's another person to look up. So
yeah, she was a tough professor. Speaking of
very demanding. very demanding.
Her critiques, I think the students, or the grad students, actually even feared as well. But she was, I think, influenced by a lot of Harlem Renaissance, I think, from when she was raised in New York too. But I think that's interesting. Oh, go ahead, you.
No, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say, it was interesting what you're saying about Joan Mitchell, and just that time period where now we can kind of look back with a different lens, with Jackson Pollock, and actually in contrast, looking at Lee Krasner, who was his, partner, um, how she was sort of, I guess, I mean, overlooked in some ways, right? And now that there's this retrospective and kind of looking back at her work and seeing the importance and the value that she brought to abstract expressionism, similarly.
I'll just
Too.
mention the last one was Barbara Kruger. I actually studied with her also
Oh,
for a
wow.
short while at UCSD. And, she definitely, her work, very minimal, very topographical, but focuses a lot on feminism and racism. And it's, she's pretty brilliant too. So.
Yeah, I think that time that you went to school there, just like really prestigious. I mean, I think that's one of the great things about university, right? You can get in touch and connection with all of these amazing artists or people in their field. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other women artists that inspire the rest of you? Thoughts? Women in general? Um, okay. I guess the other question that we had was, well, I guess a little bit about medium, the medium that you all use. Some of you are working digitally, which is in a newer, medium. One for Leo, I guess, in specifically, your artwork, portrait, Macapello, that's um, a Black woman in this kind of art historical tradition of painting that religious portrait with the halo kind of illuminating the form, right? The figure. And so I drew a similar comparison to, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, I'm sure maybe Kahinda Wiley, who kind of reinserts African American figures into art history and using that similar old master style in that traditional medium of paint and technique. And your portrait uses digital photo montage. And so I was wondering how that medium kind of informs the work. You work in a newer form. And so how does that kind of, I guess, add into within the context of art history?
I would say specifically for the way that I'm working, just in general, I'm interested in how a lot of Botswana's like cultural information is like stored through oral culture. So things aren't really written down, photographs weren't really taken, but like the stories that are passed down is how people come to know things, and it's difficult, especially when doing research, etc., to like, um, sorry, to prove what you're saying or to substantiate like a point you may want to make, because of like how the culture functions. So in my work, I've been trying to like find a space inside like the digital realm or inside um, like inside technology, to store like our storytelling conventions. So the way my other work, not this triptych specifically, but in other pieces, I integrate how like folk tales are told, how like the physical setup of where stories are usually exchanged, just trying to bring as many of the more like transient aspects of our culture into like digital space or like store it digitally, even if it is through like the scope of my own practice.
Yeah, that's interesting because you're, saying that it's the history is passed down, but not necessarily written down, maybe just told by word of mouth, maybe, or in a kind of narration. And then your work, in a sense, is kind of documenting, history, or becomes part of that history and helps to kind of, um, pass down, continue that information and knowledge to others as well. Um, So yeah, now we can take some questions from the audience. I don't know if anyone has put any into the Q&A can for the artists, or we can just keep chatting.
I was gonna say for your work,
Yeah.
Leo, it just seems so contemporary in that, especially with like the new NFTs that are happening and everything turning digital. As I was going through your gallery, I was thinking, oh my goodness, this is the way we're going to look at art in the future. Like it's no longer going to be in a brick and mortar space. It's going to be in this virtual world. And I'm like, why am I even painting? I think I have to go into that virtual world because it just seems like, I don't know, it just really brought me to, I guess, where we are now, but in a very futuristic sense. And I love this idea of like bringing together what could potentially is going to be our future with the past and the history of Botswana, like bringing it all together in like this weird kind of circle. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think even during this time, all of us going online just really
Hmm.
the showed the ability of digital work also to really shine, I think, in the virtual gallery space. But I will say at the same time, there's some work like in caustic art, I think it looks so different in person. You can't see the beauty or the translucency or the effects of it. Uh, it's better in person, some of the things. It just kind of depends. Yeah, Nanette, what drew you to that medium? It's
Maybe
such
I
an
should switch mediums.
I know that's what I'm thinking too. But I also think yet, right? Like technology
right,
hasn't
right.
gotten to that point yet, but I think one
Yes.
day it might.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah,
I just,
Nanette, what drew you to that medium
I
specifically?
just
It's a
love the smell of the wax. A lot of oil painters say they just like the smell of the paint. And for 30 years I was doing graphic design and I couldn't wait to get off the computer, even though part of my work is still digital. And I actually I take a lot of photos of shadows and then print them and then mount them to panels and then do encaustic on top of those. So I haven't given it up completely. Generally, that's a starting point. I think shadows really reflect a lot of memories, and it's one of the subjects that interests me in my work. Um, but I make a lot of monotypes as well, which is wax monotypes, and those are often a lot faster to make and very rewarding because you can see results very quickly. Um, but I don't know, I just love the smell of it. And actually,
I think
when I'm painting, oftentimes bees will fly into my studio.
Hmm.
oh,
They're
oh
following where the
wow.
wax is. So
Sweet.
That's hilarious. Um, yeah, I've definitely experimented with some old masters recipes for dangerous kind of toxic chemicals. Not because I enjoyed the smell though. But I was curious about the magic of that time period, and I think they had something that was called black magic oil or something. I don't know, something like that. And it was this really thick stuff that you kind of boil down at a high temperature. And I tried to make it, and it was fine.
I
So
wouldn't do that.
I wouldn't do that anymore. Yeah, it's just a thing I was exploring.
There's a question in the chat. Are there any new or unique mediums that the audience should be aware of in the art world?
Yeah, a lot of digital is getting extension of like GIF and just motion related images, which seems to be something that maybe gonna be necessary to learn in the future.
Yeah,
uh,
that ties to NFTs definitely.
yes, yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, so
Yeah,
it
the
is just
power of the
like,
meme.
yeah, like I said before, that like my personal experience is like submitting art is just like, first you read the conditions, and then you place yourself like, am I a fit? Like is illustration something they look for, or it's entirely different? So I cannot enter those submissions where they look for animation. But that seemed to be the near future. Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of think that even traditional painting has come full circle from, the 70s and 80s when painting was dead. And art schools talked a lot about how painting was irrelevant, and video performance, at least as the school that I went to, it was also concept based. um, but I really feel that if you look at contemporary art now, there's so many fabulous painters that are mixing all sorts of things together. Collage, I think, is huge. um, and I think somewhere with combining like painting and video, or painting and animation, we see this so much in commercial films, that to me there's a place for artists to make statements in those mediums as well. I too don't haven't done any animation, a little bit, but it was all commercial work. It wasn't based on something that I felt like I needed to say.
Yeah, Leo, in your studies, what you went into the field of graduate studies of new media. What drew you to that, and what how was that for you?
It was my
Since
undergrad that was sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, go ahead. Sorry.
It was my undergrad that was new media, and at the time, um, genuinely I took it because like no one wasn't. There was a particular type of people that were in the new media department, and it made it difficult for people of color to feel comfortable in the space. Uh, and uh, People were mainly interested in painting or sculpture. Sculpture was the majority of um, my class. Um, I think I just saw it as a space that could allow for a lot of the um, like mixing together that Nanette was talking about, like the space to experiment with different mediums, like but in one thing or towards like one body of work. So being like allowing all of the multimedia parts of myself to come together. So like sewing, being able to draw and animate or edit on the computer, take images, perform whatever, and then like bring it into one space and like kind of be able to present it as that, and not having like the same um, kind of standards, I would say, that like painting or sculpture had, for example. So like there isn't like a long tradition of new media, and there aren't like the same sort of restrictions on how it should be finally. So I think it was that sort of free space or moving room that I wanted and found there. Um, yeah, I'm not sure if I've answered.
I
Yeah,
have a
no,
question.
definitely.
I have a question for Leo. So Leo, the gold that's around the portrait, Is that gold leaf, or is that digital work as well, or is that paint?
The background is digital. Everything in front is costume and then photograph.
Oh, okay.
You know what's so interesting is just depending on the lighting, I didn't see the facial features or the indentation or the lower half, and so it was so interesting. I mean, just yeah, it reminds me just Ad Reinhardt's paintings or some other artists where they have it, the contrast between or the low contrast, I guess, between images or within an image too. That stood out. I didn't see it at first, and then I think I was looking at a different screen and it showed up, and I was like, oh, I didn't even notice that, and I thought that was an interesting thing to see. But yeah, I think that's interesting what you're saying as far as it's kind of a new territory that wasn't restricted by the long tradition or history or parameters, I guess, that maybe painting or something else, would be confined by. So we are, I guess, at the end of our time frame for the chat, but I wanted to thank you all. And Jen, if you wanted to kind of close out with our endorsement.
Yes. So thank you to everyone who organized this talk, to all the artists. Thank you so much for sharing your work. I know that sharing work can be a vulnerable process, and I really appreciate it when I'm able to get into the eyes of the artist. And also thank you to our audience, because we wouldn't have this talk if it weren't for your attendance. So this talk was made possible by the Mira Costa College Foundation and the endorsements of Sierra College Gender Equity Committee, Mira Costa College's Diversity, Equity, and Cultural Competence Committee, and Mira Costa College's Social Justice and Equity Center. And thank you, Jackie and Jane, for all your hard work in organizing this.
Yeah, thank you to all of our artists for giving this talk today. And then also, I just want to let you know that we have another conversation with some artists, some authors of Dear White Women, Let's Get Uncomfortable Talking About Racism, that's coming up at the end of this month. It's also to please check out our art show on womensoaringproject.com. And we'll have the flyer attached in the chat box. And yeah, thank you to all of you who showed up and answered these interesting and asked these interesting questions.
Thank you so
Bye,
much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.